Imagine a relationship between two really close neighbors. On one hand, you've got serious economic tensions flaring up, tariffs, protectionism, the works. But on the other hand, their military ties, their security cooperation, it's actually getting stronger, tighter than ever even.
Sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?
A profound one, exactly. And that's precisely what we're diving into today, this really complex, often paradoxical relationship between the United States and Canada right now.
Yeah, and our deep dive today, it's built on quite a bit of material. We're looking at an exhaustive analysis, various research briefs, economic reports, defense studies.
A lot of data points.
A lot. And they all kind of point towards this fascinating split, this bifurcation, in how the two countries are interacting.
So our mission today is to unpack this paradox for you. We want to look at its roots, where it comes from.
Right.
And examine the recent shocks, especially the economic ones that have really tested this relationship.
And figure out what it all means going forward for both countries.
We'll explore why Canada especially seems to be facing a particularly sharp challenge here.
Yeah, it's dealing with these deep-seated economic weaknesses, some tricky internal politics. But at the same time, it's becoming this absolutely indispensable strategic partner for the U.S.
So what does this all mean for North America? And maybe more importantly for you, as someone trying to stay informed on these big global shifts, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Okay, so before we even get into the tariff drama that everyone's talking about from 2025,
right,
we really need to grasp a key underlying factor, and that's Canada's sort of long-standing economic weakness, at least relative to the U.S.
Yeah, that's a crucial point from the sources. The 2025 tariffs, they didn't create Canada's economic problems. Not at all.
They just put a spotlight on them.
Exactly. They magnified what the experts are calling a chronic structural challenge. It's this widening gap in productivity and overall prosperity compared to the United States. And it's been building for decades.
Okay, so let's dig into that history a bit. The sources say for over a century, Canada's GDP per adult, it's kind of stuck, right?
Yeah.
Between 70% and 90% of the U.S. level.
That's right. And it's not just some abstract number.
No.
It means real, tangible differences in living standards, in opportunities for Canadians.
And the decline is pretty stark when you look at the global rankings.
It really is. Back in 1970, Canada was, believe it or not, the sixth most productive economy in the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Sixth. Wow.
Yeah. But fast forward to 2022, it had dropped all the way down to 18th place.
18th. That's quite a fall. It really tells a story about competitiveness, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests maybe a lack of adaptation or perhaps issues with long-term strategy in a tougher global market.
Let's put some concrete numbers on it. As of 2023, Canada's labor productivity was around, $74.70 USD per hour worked?
Yeah, about that. Compared to the U.S.'s $97 USD.
So that's roughly a 30% productivity deficit. Huge.
It is huge. And it translates directly. We're talking about a loss of something like $20,000 per person per year in potential GDP for Canadians.
Wow.
And Canadian wages, they also trail U.S. wages by about 8%, according to estimates.
And get this, for anyone thinking about investing, $1,000 put into Canada's main stock index back in 2000. It'd be worth about $4,400 today. But that same $1,000 in the U.S. S&P 500
much better, I'm guessing,
would have grown to $6,000. That's over 35% more. Even Australia, another resource-rich country, is now almost 10% more productive than Canada.
So the unavoidable question is, why? Why this persistent gap?
Right.
Well, the data seems to show it's really concentrated at the top. The top 10% of Canadian earners, they account for 75% of the entire GDP per adult gap with the U.S.
3/4. That points pretty directly towards a brain drain, doesn't it?
It certainly suggests that. Highly educated people, successful entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
they see significantly higher rewards, more opportunities just south of the border.
Makes sense.
And another big piece of the puzzle is chronic underinvestment. Canada ranks way down, 29th in the OECD, for R&D spending as a percentage of GDP.
29th.
Yeah. And business investment generally has been described in reports as pretty lackluster, especially since around 2015.
What's also fascinating here is how population growth fits in.
Yeah.
Canada's had really high population growth lately, which, boosts the overall GDP number.
Sure, more people, bigger total economy.
But it hasn't been matched by capital investment. So they're adding workers, but they aren't necessarily making each worker more productive.
Which leads to that downward trend in real GDP per capita.
Yeah.
The amount per person isn't keeping up.
Exactly.
And the OECD projections based on this are, well, They're pretty sobering.
Yeah.
They predict Canada will be the worst performing advanced economy in real GDP per capita growth
Worse.
for the next 4 decades,
Yeah.
all the way out to 2060.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not just an economic issue then.
No, the analysis frames it as a genuine national security vulnerability. It limits Canada's ability to absorb shocks like these tariffs and weakens its leverage in negotiations.
Okay, so that's the backdrop, this chronic weakness. Now, let's turn to the acute shock. Those U.S. tariffs imposed in 2025. This is where things get really interesting.
Right. The sources are clear. The tariff era officially kicked off February 1st, 2025, with an executive order. Duties on Canadian goods, effective March 4th.
And the scope was broad.
Oh yeah, sweeping. 25% tariffs on a whole range of things: agriculture, manufactured goods, consumer products, and then 10% on energy, potash, critical minerals.
Plus, there were those universal tariffs too, right? Steel and aluminum, autos.
Yep, 25% on steel and aluminum, 25% on auto imports. Those applied to Canada as well. The stated U.S. reasons were protecting jobs, fighting drug trafficking, addressing immigration.
And things escalated pretty quickly.
They did. By July 31st, 2025, the general tariff rate on goods from Canada not compliant with the CUSMA trade deal jumped from 25% up to 35%.
35%.
Effective August 1st. And they added a punitive 40% anti-transshipment tariff, basically to stop companies trying to reroute goods to avoid the duties.
So how did Canada hit back?
Immediately. On March 4th, the same day the U.S. tariffs took effect, Canada slapped 25% retaliatory tariffs on about $30 billion worth of U.S. goods.
Which is around 22 billion U.S. dollars.
Right, targeting things like U.S. agriculture or manufactured items. They also mirrored the U.S. with 25% tariffs on American steel, aluminum, and non-CUSMA vehicles.
And they have more firepower in reserve.
Apparently so. There's talk of a potential phase 2, ready to target another $125 billion. That's roughly $90 billion USD of U.S. imports if needed.
Okay, so this trade war is underway. What's the projected impact?
Well, the economic modeling, like from the Yale Budget Lab, suggests a noticeable hit to the U.S. economy. Lower real GDP growth by maybe 0.5 to 0.8 percentage points in 2025.
That translates to job losses.
Over 500,000 potential job losses, yeah.
Yeah.
And an annual hit of maybe $135 billion in the long run. For consumers, prices could rise 1.8% to 2.0%.
Which means
an average income loss per household of somewhere between $2,400 and $2,700 a year. Not insignificant.
But as you said, the impact is asymmetric. It hits Canada harder.
Much harder. Canada is far more dependent on trade with the U.S. That same analysis projects Canada's long-run economy could be 2.1% smaller.
2.1%. That's nearly 5 times the relative impact projected for the U.S.
Exactly. The OECD agrees too, projecting a significant reduction in Canada's growth because of this.
But there's a mitigating factor, right? The trade deal.
Yes, and this is a key insight from the analysis, the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA. It provides a crucial exemption. As of August 2025, over 85% of U.S.-Canada trade is actually still tariff-free because it falls under CUSMA rules.
85%. That sounds like a pretty good shield.
It is, but it's an incomplete shield. Here's the catch. Back in 2024, about 38% of U.S. imports from Canada didn't bother using CUSMA terms.
Why not?
Because the old pre-existing tariffs were so low anyway, it wasn't worth the paperwork or complexity for many firms.
But now...
Now, those goods are suddenly exposed to that punitive 35% tariff if they don't meet CUSMA rules.
Which creates a massive incentive for Canadian businesses.
A powerful incentive, yes, to basically re-engineer their supply chains, prove origin, meet all the CUSMA requirements. And that can be really costly and complex.
So the U.S. essentially weaponized the trade agreement itself.
That's how the analysis frames it, yes.
Yeah.
Weaponized economic interdependence. It channels the pain specifically to firms that aren't playing by the U.S. dictated rules, maximizing leverage to force changes in Canadian economic behavior. Very strategic.
Wow. Okay, so facing this, how is Canada actually responding? You mentioned a dual-track strategy.
Exactly. 2 main approaches running in parallel. Track 1 is all about long-term trade diversification, trying to reduce that heavy reliance on the U.S. market over time.
And a key piece of that is CETA, the deal with Europe.
Yes, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the EU. Since it kicked in around 2017, trade in goods and services between the EU and Canada has jumped significantly, by 71% actually.
71%.
From about $72 billion in 2016 to $123 billion in 2023. And it's been especially good, apparently, for smaller Canadian businesses, SMEs, giving them new markets.
And they've also looked towards Asia with the CPTPP.
Right, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. That gives Canada preferential access to 10 other countries, mostly in the Asia-Pacific. Wipes out tariffs on 99% of products.
And is that gaining traction?
Some positive signs. Trade with those CPTPP partners grew about 10% in the first 3 years. It's movement.
But is it enough? Can these deals really offset the massive U.S. trade volume?
That's the core question. And the reality, according to the gravity model of trade.
Which says trade likes proximity.
Exactly. Geographic closeness, integrated supply chains. Those factors still heavily favor U.S. Canada trade dominance. Diversification helps, but it probably can't replace the U.S. relationship volume-wise, certainly not quickly.
And that leads to this mismatch in timelines, right? Which the research highlights.
A huge mismatch. Those 2025 tariffs hit hundreds of billions in trade almost overnight. CETA, the EU deal. That added $50 billion over 7 years.
So diversification is more like a long game.
A generational hedge, as one report puts it. It's smart long-term planning, but it's not a rapid response tool for the immediate crisis caused by the tariffs.
And there's even a potential contradiction within Canada's strategy, something about the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, it's subtle but potentially important. Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy is partly about de-risking from the U.S., finding other partners.
Makes sense.
But it also tends to align pretty closely with U.S. geopolitical goals in the region, especially regarding China.
So that alignment might limit how fully Canada can actually engage with China, the region's biggest economy.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It creates a bit of a strategic bind if the goal is pure economic diversification.
Okay, so that's track one, diversification, the long game. Now for track two. And this is where that paradox really comes into focus.
This is where it gets really interesting. While the economic side is full of friction, defense and security integration, it's actually deepening at an unprecedented pace.
Why? What's driving that convergence?
It seems to be a shared view in both Washington and Ottawa that the global security situation is getting worse. New threats are emerging, including to North America itself.
So the U.S. sees Canada as vital for continental defense.
Indispensable. They're strategically fortifying North America, and Canada is a key partner in that.
And the big example here is NORAD modernization.
Absolutely. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, Canada's committed a huge amount, see $38.6 billion over the next 2 decades.
$38.6 billion for what specifically?
To upgrade capabilities, mainly against new kinds of threats like hypersonic missiles, advanced cruise missiles, things the old systems weren't designed for.
And there's a big Arctic component, that radar system.
Yes, the Arctic Over-the-Horizon Radar, or AOTHR, that's a $6 billion piece of the puzzle. It's designed specifically to detect threats coming over the Arctic.
Using Australian tech.
Leveraging Australia's world-leading tech in that area, yes. They're aiming for initial capability around 2029.
Okay, so surveillance is upgrading. What about integration in buying military gear?
Deep integration there, too. Take Canada's purchase of Boeing P-8A Poseidon aircraft. A big deal. $10.4 billion.
Why those planes?
Primarily for interoperability, so they can work seamlessly with the U.S. Navy and also with the other Five Eyes intelligence partners, the UK, Australia, New Zealand.
And Boeing invests back into Canada.
Significant investments, yes, part of the deal. Something like 81 Canadian firms are already part of Boeing's global supply chain for the P-8A.
And it's similar with drones, the Sky Guardians.
Same logic. Canada bought MQ-9B Sky Guardian drones from General Atomics, a $2.49 billion purchase.
Right.
Again, the key is ensuring they operate smoothly with NORAD and other NATO assets.
Create these jobs too.
Nearly 700 jobs annually in Canada, according to the estimates tied to that deal.
And how is all this close cooperation even possible, legally speaking, with U.S. export controls?
There are special provisions. The most important is probably the ITAR Canadian exemption. ITAR is the International Traffic in Arms Regulations.
Right.
This exemption basically allows many types of unclassified defense items and services to be exported to Canada without needing a specific license. It streamlines things enormously.
So if you zoom out, what's the big picture here? A North American fortress.
That's the concept emerging from the analysis, yeah.
Yeah.
The U.S. increasingly sees Canada not just as an ally, but as a secure, reliable source for strategic goods.
Not just defense platforms.
No, everything from defense systems to critical minerals, even energy. Things the U.S. might not want to rely on geopolitical rivals for anymore.
So this deep defense cooperation acts as a kind of anchor, ballast.
Ballast is a good word used in the reports. It stabilizes the overall relationship. It creates powerful groups in government, in industry, in both countries that have a strong interest in keeping things stable, even when trade disputes are flaring up.
Okay, but it's not all smooth sailing within Canada, is it? These external pressures, the tariffs, they're hitting a country with its own internal fault lines, especially out west.
That's right. And this is where the external shocks really intersect in a unique way with existing domestic tensions.
How so?
Well, the economic pain from the tariffs, combined with this feeling that the federal government in Ottawa isn't doing enough or isn't responding adequately, it's seriously inflaming Western alienation,
Particularly in Alberta and Saskatchewan.
especially there, the resource-producing provinces. And the analysis suggests this poses a real growing threat to Canadian national unity.
What are the roots of that alienation? It's not new, right?
Not at all. Long-standing grievances. First, there's the federal equalization program.
How does that work?
Basically, it transfers funds from richer provinces to poorer ones to ensure comparable public services nationwide. Alberta, being resource-rich, has historically been a huge net contributor.
Meaning they pay in way more than they get back.
Billions more. And critics in the West, particularly in Alberta, see this as fundamentally unfair, especially the large amounts going to Quebec, which is the biggest recipient.
Was there a vote on this?
Yes, in a 2021 Alberta referendum, 62% voted in favor of removing equalization from the Constitution entirely.
Wow. Okay, so that's one major grievance. What else?
Second, federal energy and environmental policies. Things like the national carbon tax or delays and cancellations of major pipeline projects needed to get Western oil and gas to market.
Seen as targeting their main industry.
Viewed by many in the West as a direct assault, designed to constrain their economy, often perceived as favoring environmental goals prioritized elsewhere, particularly in central Canada.
And the third element is political, a feeling of not being heard.
A deep sense of political powerlessness, yes. Polls show only about 24% of Albertans feel their province is respected by the rest of Canada, and 62% feel other Canadians just don't understand their sense of alienation.
So how serious is this? Are we talking actual separatism?
The numbers are concerning. A Ledger poll from May 2025 found 29% of Albertans would support becoming their own country,
Nearly a third.
and 35% would support forming a new independent country along with other Western provinces.
And political events could push those numbers higher.
Seems likely. An Angus Reid poll from April 2025 indicated that if the current federal Liberal government were to win the next election, support for leaving Canada could jump to 30% in Alberta and 33% in Saskatchewan. Those are significant figures. But it's important to understand the type of separatism, right? It's different from Quebec's historical movement.
How so?
Quebec separatism is deeply rooted in protecting French language and distinct culture. Alberta's sentiment, as analyzed in the sources, is driven primarily by economic issues and political grievances.
Free market conservatism, the resource sector.
Exactly. It's less about cultural identity and more about feeling economically constrained and politically ignored by Ottawa.
So, for many Albertans, maybe separation talk is more of a threat, a bargaining chip.
That's a key interpretation, an if-then scenario. Use the threat of separation to try and force concessions from the federal government on things like equalization reform or getting pipelines built.
And the U.S. tariffs play right into this narrative.
Perfectly. They inflict direct economic harm on the West, and they feed the story that Ottawa is failing to protect Western interests. It acts like an accelerant on that existing discontent, like pouring gasoline on embers.
So what's the bigger picture consequence of this internal division?
It significantly ties the federal government's hands, especially in foreign policy. They're constantly trying to balance their international strategy, like dealing with U.S. tariffs, against this deep regional unhappiness at home.
Which could weaken their negotiating position with the U.S.
Almost certainly. It makes it harder for them to present a fully united front or take tough stances if they're worried about domestic political fallout, particularly in the West.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize all this. What does it all mean for Canada, for North America? We've got this deep paradox. Economic friction getting worse, but strategic integration getting deeper.
And the analysis suggests this isn't just a temporary blip. This is the new enduring reality.
Managed friction.
That's a good term for it, managed friction. The economic relationship is likely to stay more transactional, more politicized, maybe even more confrontational at times.
While the security side gets stronger or more institutionalized.
Exactly. Deeper cooperation, more shared systems driven by those shared security concerns.
So for Canada, navigating this contradiction is key to success. The reports offer some strategies.
Yes, a three-pronged approach is recommended for the Canadian government. First, what they call a domestic productivity offensive.
Finally, tackling that gap we talked about at the start.
Precisely. Boosting business investment, pumping up R&D, maybe using targeted tax incentives, reforming regulations to encourage competition.
And aligning population growth with capital investment.
Critically important. Making sure growth translates to per-person prosperity, not just a bigger overall GDP number.
Okay, that's prong one. Fix the domestic economy. What's two?
Prong two is deliberate deepening of strategic integration with the U.S.
Lean into the security side.
Yes. Fully fund and speed up that NORAD modernization. Create a formal joint U.S. Canada strategy for critical minerals. And this is clever usage, the less politicized defense relationship as a back channel, a way to manage trade disputes more quietly.
Interesting. Okay, and prong three.
Prong three is patient and persistent diversification. Keep working on deals like CETA with Europe, CPTPP in Asia.
But be realistic about the timelines.
Exactly. Understand these are valuable long-term hedges, insurance policies almost, but they aren't going to solve the immediate economic pressure from the U.S. overnight.
Okay, that's for the government. What about for you if you're running a Canadian business or investing there? What are the takeaways?
The recommendations are pretty stark. First, a radical focus on CUSMA compliance. It's not optional anymore.
You have to meet those rules of origin.
Absolutely. Invest in supply chain mapping. Get the expertise needed, or risk facing those huge tariffs. It's essential.
Second recommendation.
Actively seize strategic sector opportunities. Look closely at areas like aerospace, defense, shipbuilding, critical minerals, clean technology.
Why those?
Because those are the sectors likely to be shielded from the trade friction, thanks to the deepening security ties. They might even get preferential treatment.
And finally,
build resilience. Build resilient and redundant supply chains. The old just-in-time model, probably too risky now.
So diversify suppliers, hold more inventory.
Diversify suppliers, increase stocks of critical components, maybe even explore secondary market access in Europe or Asia as a long-term risk mitigation strategy. Prepare for disruptions.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive really highlights how complex the U.S. Canada future looks. It's this constant dance, isn't it, between economic headwinds and these powerful strategic needs.
It really is.
Yeah.
And connecting it all back, Canada's long-term future, its prosperity, its security, seems to hinge on doing two things well simultaneously. First, strengthening its own fundamental economic competitiveness, closing that productivity gap.
Right.
And second, skillfully leveraging its undeniable strategic importance to the United States, using that security partnership as both a shield against some economic pressures and maybe as a source of diplomatic leverage in negotiations.
So the final thought for you listening, what does this all mean? How might this very paradoxical relationship reshape the North American economy? Think about supply chains, geopolitical alliances.
Yeah, and what opportunities or maybe what significant challenges does this unique dynamic create for the industry, the economies, the investments that you care about?
Lots to chew on there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.
Until next time, keep digging for those insights.